La da 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 da. 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 My love has come along. My lonely days are over, and life is like a song. At last, the skies above are gray. My heart was wrapped up in clover. Yesterday, charted out to wander, caught a dragonfly inside a jar. Fearful at the gentle sound of thunder, and tearful at falling of a star. And the seasons, they go round and round, and the painted ponies, they go up and down. We're captive on a carousel of time. Can't return, we can only look behind from where we came, and go round and round and round in a circle game. Hello? It's not even going up tonight. I thought that I would go ahead and have a conversation about a couple of different things tonight to go over some of the things that we've talked about in the past a little bit more and make sure that they're actually getting out there a little bit more. Mm-hmm. Trying to make sure that everything is okay. So, having gotten into some debates, of course, recently about some of these things, it's important, I think, that we discuss some of these things as we're talking and as we're looking at different knowledges that are coming along, different understandings that are coming along as we see changes in science and as we see changes in the way that we're able to evaluate things. Wow. Okay, let's see. If Hello, hello, hello. I am trying to make sure I have a couple of things figured out. How are you doing, Kylie? I tried to share it out, but I don't think like the last I went live and I don't think it actually like lived. Like it didn't seem like it went anywhere. I was a little weirded out. I wanted to just kind of talk about some of the things that we've talked about before in here. It's good to hear. I mean, the Bad Durenberg shaman that we talked about the other day is a new thing, and most of the things that we talk about here, I think, kind of come over and over, I guess. So I guess it's not unusual to talk about what we talked about before. I do think that there's a lot of lack of understanding on some of these things, though, and so I wanted to make sure and go over them because I know that there are a lot of people out there who don't, um, you know, I got in an argument today about the peopling of the Western Hemisphere. So I think that there's a lot of people out there that don't quite have an understanding of how it works. I think that I need to, as I'm trying to get the live to work, because Lord knows I can understand science, but I can't understand the live, right? I think I need to get, that's what I need. La, da, 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 da. Sorry, I want to try and fix this. It just gave me a next level up, I guess, in the live experience. That's weird. I wonder, like, it's not, like, I wonder if it's just not going out, if it's not on the FYP. Because I sent out notices. I thought I had sent out a notice in here to you. Hey, Eagle. I'm wondering if it's just not coming up on the feed. Like I don't know what's going on with it. It weirds me out all the time. It's doing weird things all the time. So I have to figure out how to cross-platform it with Insta, I think a little bit better too, so that I can make sure that I get enough going over there on Insta that I can cross-platform if, it goes bye-bye again. Yeah, I mean, going over things again and again, it seems sometimes is almost the best way to do it because I feel like, new information for somebody out there. Like I feel like it's always new information for at least one person out there. And I think that, it's always important to make sure that we're still getting that new information. Sorry, I'm a little bit distracted by the TikTok itself, like by the video streaming platform itself and trying to figure it out. And my ND brain is trying to pull out of that focus and pull into the focus of what I intended to focus on. So let me do my best. I was talking today with somebody who decided that there were no ghost species and then decided to prove me wrong by showing me the ghost species in Africa. And I'm amused by the idea that, ghost species are only one place or ghost species are, I'm just amused by people's idea of what reality is, I think sometimes, like the disconnection. I've noticed, I guess, a lot more lately of the
groups out there who have more of a tendency to try and erase or try and decide that people don't exist, and a lot more of a presence of that lately. And I feel like it might just be because of where I'm at on TikTok right now compared to where I've been at on TikTok. But I'm like, you guys can go and do it somewhere else. I don't need you. I don't need. I've already shown you where you're wrong. Leave me the fuck alone. But when we're talking about the ghost species, that newer one that we found recently, when we found the new actual species of human, when we found HLD6 a couple of months ago, that species is in Asia. So it's not like we're looking at there being an area of the world really that there isn't ghost species within, that there isn't different groups of humans within as Homo sapien is spreading across the globe, right? And I don't really get I never get the disconnect or the need to disconnect it. But I think that even more now I'm sitting here going, I don't really get the cognitive disconnect in thinking that, so the 3D Mastodon site came up as well. And that's a video I just published right before I went live. And that video shows the San Diego Natural History Museum's website, and it goes over all of the stuff on the San Diego History Museum's website. And when it goes over all of the different things for the Cerruti Mastodon on the San Diego Natural History Museum's website, it talks about, how this paper was published, how it came to be, the fact that it wasn't even archaeologists and anthropologists who were working on it initially, but it was actually paleontologists who, I'm not exactly sure what section of animal study during the Paleolithic paleontology is, but it's not like anthropology and archaeology are the study of human remains or remains associated with other human beings, whereas like paleontology is a study of a specific kind of animal, or of maybe of different animals, like it might have different levels within it, right? So with that, I'm looking at the site, and you're seeing where it's literally the first people out on the site are people who are studying animals, and then they look at the study of the animals and they go, okay, well, that right there is a human thing, so we need to get the human study people out here. And on the website, they're talking about the fact that they published their paper in 2017. It's this huge team of people who published this paper. Many of them work at the San Diego Museum of Natural History, and this includes the lead paleontologist of the San Diego Natural History Museum, right? Which means we're talking about somebody who, first of all, is looking at his field being different than the archaeology and anthropology field, and yet even he can see the humanness in this, right? And even he's going, well, this is not animal. And it's a lead. So by the time you get to the point where you are the lead of any museum, where you are the archaeology or anthropology or ontology or whatever, the lead, the head of the head of the head of, you have put in some serious time and some serious credit. You don't get to that point without having some serious underneath you, right? So this paper being published in 2017 is a paper that has several different people who have high levels of expertise and focus within this area. And they said we expected pushback. We expect the fact that there is going to be people out there who want to, look at this further and who are not going to immediately buy into it. That when you are trying to change something that everybody believes, you have to come with a preponderance of evidence. You have to come with massive amounts of evidence if you're, trying to change something that everybody believes is a typical. And so, of course, they came with a preponderance of evidence. And yet the pushback and the feedback that they're getting, the conversation isn't a conversation. They're having people coming in who are like writing papers who have never even looked at the bones or talked to the people. So like we're talking about people who have never directly looked at any form of the evidence, not talking to the people, not looking at the physical, not any of it. They have decided based on an article they read that the article is incorrect, right? That there's, that the evidence behind the article must not exist. And for me, I feel like this is something that we're getting pretty cross everything at this point. Like there are so many people out there who are like, I debunked you by posting an article that doesn't do anything, right? Or who have decided that because their narrow viewpoint states something that they have no ability to open their ears and listen to something else, right? That this is what they were taught in school, and because it was what they were taught in school 30 years ago, that it is the only truth that will ever be, because new does not equate, there's nothing new. Nothing new is ever coming to be. And I feel like it's on so many different platforms and thought processes that we're seeing this, right? So many different spaces where we're seeing this level of cognitive disconnect, because I do feel it is cognitive disconnect. It is disconnecting cognitively from the actual reality that you're working with, right? And so I have been kind of trying to deal with that, I think, on a lot of spaces lately. I feel like it's not just something we see anymore. Like, it's not even something we see just in science. It's something that we're seeing on Facebook. It's something that we're seeing with our families. It's something that we're seeing on, every different level, where people are sitting here going, well, my feelings state that that's not a fact. My feelings state that your evidence is wrong. And it's like, your feelings doesn't get to state jack shit when I have evidence to the contrary, right? Like, this is the difference between fact and feelings, like fact has evidence, fact has something hard, feelings is what you feel internally, and it does not ever, destroy the thought process of fact that exists. And as like I'm sitting around watching this and dealing with it in my personal life and dealing with it in different areas, I guess for me, it's one of those things where I'm just like, I can't even anymore, like, really, I don't even really understand the feel of it anymore. Like my feelings. Let's talk about facts versus feelings. I can't even understand how I cognitively explain it in my head anymore. Like I can't even understand how I'm looking at it anymore. I can't even come up with the words to look at somebody and go, what is that level of cognitive disconnect? Right? Like how, like, that's a whole different level of what the fuck, right? And so I'm pretty astonished, I think, all across the board. And so when we're coming to spaces like talking about evidence of things, like things in the archaeological record and things within the scientific community, um, now don't get me wrong, I firmly believe that Western science is problematic at best, and that it is only with the advent and influx of non-Western information that Western science is starting to change its understanding of things, and that it is that inflow of non-Western information that is improving it, and that being narrow-minded without the thought process that other realities exist, really, to me, becomes as inbred as the Habsburg jaw, right? Like if you only accept stuff that you can prove by stuff that was proven by something that was proven by something that was proven 3,000 years ago, it makes no sense to me, right? um I feel not feel I think that for me it becomes one of those things as I'm watching this, where I'm like, I have no respect for academia or Western science, and yet I also cannot accept or respect a side that does not have evidence for anything, that does not think that they need to provide evidence, that does not think that they have to hold out evidence on something, right? And so I think that's where it's been for me a lot lately, is what the fuck. Um, so I need to have, even in my thought processes of worship, even in my thought processes of faith, I can never have blindness. I don't do blind faith. I don't do blind thought. It just doesn't work right for my brain. I have to understand the why. I've always had to understand the why. I had to understand why we called tree tree. Why did we use that specific word? Why didn't we use another word? And so I think that that's the difference for me, is that my need must have something that I can tangibly see to understand, right? That I can't just accept it on blind faith. So when we're looking at things like seeing 7 different species in our DNA that we haven't found in the fossil record, the ghost species that we see in our DNA, I need to have articles that have actually looked at the actual evidence. I need to have people who have actually studied what's actually there and can look at what's there and, make their conclusions or draw their conclusions based on hard evidence and based on actually seeing something instead of their feelings. And so we have all of these people out here like, I can debunk you by throwing this article at you, and it's like that article isn't a valid article. Like, why does that debunk this? And so when we talk about these things and I put like sources up, I try and make sure that all of the sources that I'm putting up again are ones that you can get to without a paywall. Yes, are also ones that I make sure like have credit behind them, have knowledge behind them, right? Are usually scientific sources. So when I've got the stuff about the, ghost DNA and the other species up there, that's what that is. It's stuff that isn't something that is based on somebody's feelings or thoughts. It's based on somebody actually looking at the hard evidence and presenting the hard evidence. Again, my brain is on distract mode tonight because of everything else going on. When we're looking at the ghost species, it's important to look at where and how. When we look at the other species in the fossil record, pretty much anything that is a Homo species, Homo being the genus. So Homo erectus, the genus is Homo, the species is erectus. Homo sapien, the genus is Homo, the species is sapien. Anything underneath the Homo genus, with the exception of Homo habilis, is a descendant species of Homo erectus, comes from Homo erectus. It seems that Homo habilis is probably one of the ancestors of Homo erectus. So anything having to do with the Homo species is interrelated. When we're looking at the species that we lived alongside, there's a couple of different species that are descendant species of Homo erectus that we didn't really live alongside, but they're more our ancestors. They would have been there in the very beginning, but not by the, middle, basically. And those are like Heidelbergensis and Homo antecessor. Whereas the ones that we had, that we lived alongside during the middle and towards, the last few thousand years, right? I think, we have thought process that Denisovan didn't die out to maybe 13,000 years ago. So, but the other thought process on Denisovan's die out is 30,000 years ago. So, you kind of have to go back and forth on it as to which one you're positive is it. And so I would say at least the last few thousand years, right? So the other species that we lived alongside would have been Neanderthal and Denisovan, which we know of because of the fact that we see their DNA in our DNA. So we know we lived alongside them. Homo naledi is a species that was in existence when we started coming into existence. So it is very likely that we knew and lived alongside Homo naledi, and they're one of the ones that I consider us as having lived alongside. And then Homo florensis on the island of Flores in Indonesia, we all know about as the hobbit species. Homo luzonensis comes from the island of Luzon in the Philippines. And Homo longi is the dragon man that we see in Long Cave in China. When we're looking at, those are the 6 species that we've had that we've known of us living alongside. The reasons that we think that we've lived alongside these species is both biological interaction that we can see in our DNA, like with Neanderthal and Denisovan, also living in the same cave structures or in the same spaces, like you'll see layers that are Denisovan and you'll see layers that intermix human and Denisovan or sapien and Denisovan. Um, it's also their timeline. Like if you look at Longi and not Longi, Florensis and Luzozensis, we see that their timeline is roughly like 100,000 years ago to 30, 40,000 years ago, 60,000 years ago in one case. And then when we're looking at Longi, we haven't really timeline Longi so much that I know of, because Longi is a singular of their species. Longi, I think, is like 170,000 years old for the species, for the only representation of his species that we have. Last year, we found another species that we call HLD6, and HLD6 is found in Asia as well, in China. HLD6 shows a composite of kind of like Homo sapien features and some more Homo erectus kind of features, though some kind of, I think there's a cross feature, like other features that are features that are also seen in Neanderthal or Denisovan. I know for one that the tooth, there's a gap between the molar and the back of the jaw. This would be something that we do not see in sapien, but we do see in Neanderthal and erectus and Denisovan. In fact, sapien is the only species that we do not see that in. Yet it has the flat face that sapien does, and it has the start of the chin that sapien has, and sapien is the only other species to have this chin. So HLD6 is likely to be one of the other species out there that we're interacting with and interrelated with, due to its timeline. It comes into being at 300,000 years ago, or at least the one find that we have is 300,000 years ago. To me, when we look at 300,000 years ago and we see the start of our species speciating at 300,000 years ago, what we're seeing is that 300,000 years ago, we see our first instance of Homo sapien in Morocco and Northern Africa, and then we see our next incidence of Homo sapien at 260,000 years ago in Ethiopia, and then our third incidence of Homo sapien at 260,000 years ago as well in South Africa. Now, when we see these three, what we're seeing is the start of our features. You're seeing the chin, which is one thing that we do see within all three of those different initial Homo sapiens. You're seeing the flatter face. You are still seeing that the forehead is a little bit lower and that the cranial capacity is more of an oval shape than a round shape. Now, as you're looking at that and you're looking at Holongdong 6, or HLD6, we're looking at a skull at 300,000 years ago. So at the same time that we're seeing our very first Homo sapien in North Africa, we're seeing a very similar looking skull in Asia. And this skull has some of the traits that are Homo sapiens, some of the traits that are erectus. So the flat face, but without the chin. The difference in teeth that is in erectus, which we do not see in the initial Homo sapien find within Africa and Morocco. So I would state that HLD6 is most likely, so we know now that we come about as a convergence, right? We come about as a convergence of Heidelbergensis and Antecessor and Ergaster and Erectus, several different species interbreeding and interconverging with each other. And it is these several different species coming together that's how we come out to speciation through convergence. And if we're coming out of speciation through convergence of these many species, having these many species also living in Asia at the time, because we do know that these many species are also living in Asia at the time, would mean that it's likely that children are born with similar instances of species traits, right? Because you're getting some of the same mixes of species. This does not mean that HLD6 is a Homo sapien. And it is unlikely in my mind that HLD6 is going to be an antecessor of Homo sapien. That's unlikely in my mind. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's exactly the truth. That's just unlikely in my mind, and we haven't seen any indication of it yet. When, or at least there's no publication of any indication of it yet. So HLD6, when they publish on HLD6, they also publish on the 7th ghost species find. So it's important to go over what ghost species are. Ghost species are species that we see a little bit of them in our current DNA. Now, this is the same as we see a little bit of Neanderthal in our current DNA and Denisovan in our current DNA. This little bit that we see in our current DNA, it's like genomes. It's not genomes, genes. These few genes that we get that we are absolutely certain are, terrestrial. Hello, Harper. Are absolutely certainly terrestrial genes. So it's not that we're looking at, ancient aliens kind of thought process. Um, and they are absolutely not sapien genes, right? And so we're looking at these genes and they don't look like sapien genes and they don't look like Neanderthal genes and they don't look like Denisovan genes, which we also see within us. And we also have a full genome of Neanderthal and Denisovan, so we can see them not only within us, but having their full genome, see them as a whole, right? And so we see that we don't have Neanderthal, or these genes aren't Neanderthal and Denisovan, and they're not Homo sapien. So they have to be a different species. Now, they could be a species we've already found in the fossil record that we don't have DNA from. We don't have DNA from Naledi, from Longi, from Florensis, from Luzonzensis. In fact, the only ones that we have DNA from so far are Neanderthal and Denisovan. So these can actually absolutely be, instead of ghost species, they are species that we see in the fossil record already, but we don't have DNA from, so we don't know that we see them in the fossil record already. They are, though, unique genomes, and they are genomes that we see only in certain areas and in certain groups within areas. So when we talk about there being 3 ghost species within Africa, the 3 ghost species that we see within Africa, we see within the Yoruba people, and we see within the Kwe people. So the Yoruba people are in West Africa. I'm so geographically challenged. And the Kwe people are in South Africa. And so we're seeing these 3 ghost species that are the same 3 ghost species in the Yoruba people and in the Kwe people. There's many other indications that we have that show that the Yoruba and the Kwe are actually the oldest group of Homo sapiens out there. Like they're the so those who are not of that group are probably not like descendant of that group, right? It's not like it's the descendants of the Yoruba or the Kwe people that are the other groups or the other communities. What it is that they are the their genes are the oldest continuity, right? So when we look at how descendancy works, mitochondrially, so the DNA that we receive from our mother is called our mitochondrial DNA or our mtDNA. And the DNA that we receive from our father comes through. So our father gives us a chromosome for gender. That's really the what the father's DNA does, is gives us the gender chromosome, right? And the father's DNA chooses whether it's the X chromosome or the Y chromosome. That doesn't mean we don't get genes from the father's mother, father. What it means is that the way we trace lines is differently. So with mtDNA, the way that we would trace a family line is each X DNA is a unique X DNA in a woman, and how she passes it down is unique. So I get an X from my father and an X from my mother. My father gives me his mother's X. My mother's X is a combination of her 2 X's. Toss them together, smush them around, make a whole new X, toss it at me, right? It could have 10% of my mother's X chromosome and 90% of my mother's father's X, chromosome. Well, my mother's father's X chromosome. Or it could have 50-50, 75-25. It's different for each child. So if I have 3 daughters with the same male who is giving the same X chromosome into this play, each of those 3 daughters is going to receive a different X from me, and each of those 3 daughters is going to give a different X out. why DNA is different in the fact that why DNA is father to son, it's the same. And it only goes to the sons, and it's the same from father to son. So when we look at tracing genetics and tracing family lines, we can see that the tracing of genetics and family lines and the way that we're looking at genes isn't the easiest way for me to put it is we're not looking at the ancestors of the say that the first nation on the planet of Homo sapiens, after Homo sapiens solidifies, is called the Yali Nation. And say that the Yali Nation is still alive today. The descendants of the Yali Nation, right? So in the Yali Nation, there are 30 people. Of the Yali Nation, of those 30 people, only 5 people were able to carry on their genes till today, right? And every person whose genes passed down of the 5, every one of the 5 whose genes passed down to a different group of people. So we have people 1 through 5. And people 1 through 5 passed down their gene survivability. They're the founding 5 of every other person on the planet. Person 2 is the person whose genes all passed down to the current day Yali Nation. Person 1's genes all passed down to the current day Valley generation or nation, right? Person 3, their genes all passed down to the Hani Nation. Person 4, their genes all passed down to the Seda Nation, right? Each person of that original 5, as their genes are passing down, person 1 and person 2 aren't related, right? Person 1 and person 2 weren't even brothers. They're just 2 people that live in this band. So if person 1's DNA all passes down to the Valley Nation and person's 2 DNA all passes down to the Yali Nation, the Yali Nation being in the space that it was originally in when we started passing down genes is absolutely the oldest nation on the planet. It's the oldest people on the planet. It's the place of the first people on this planet. And yet the Valley Nation is not a descendant of the Yali Nation, right? It is not a descendant of person 2's Yali genes, because those are the only Yali genes that have survived in the Yali people. They're a descendant of person 1's genes. Whether or not person 1 was Yali, whether or not person 1 was Yali when they died, is not what would impact whether or not you're a descendant of the Yali Nation. Because person 1, their genes are no longer found within the Yali Nation. Only person 2's genes are found within the Yali Nation. So when people talk about things like, you're all descended from this group, or, since we all started in this space, that means that that's the ancestors of everybody. People make it to Turtle Island at 50,000 years ago. There were not people in Asia 50,000 years ago. There were not Homo sapiens in Asia 50,000 years ago for people who made it to Turtle Island 50,000 years ago to have left behind. The people that are in Asia today are descendants of people who came after people moved through Asia to get to Turtle Island, with the exception of some spaces within the southeastern region, because the people that were there prior to this movement through are the people who are in Australia. The people in Australia have been there for 70,000 years. So as people are moving through Asia to get to Turtle Island, there are people in Australia, right? That does not mean that the people who are in Turtle Island are the descendants of Africa. It does not mean that the people in Turtle Island are the descendants of Asia. It does not mean that the people in Turtle Islands are descendants of Australia. The people who currently inhabit or have inhabited for the last 50,000 years, Africa or Asia or Australia. Asia hasn't been inhabited that long, so 40,000 years, who has inhabited these spaces in these regions. The people who inhabit these spaces in these regions are not the ancestors of people who left before their ancestors were born. You may be the descendant of the original Yali person who stayed in the original Yali space and you're a Yali. That does not make you the ancestor of the original Valley person who lives in the Valley Nation. It just doesn't. And trying to utilize these things to debunk, trying to utilize these things to erase, trying to take what can only be described as white supremacist knowledge or thought processes that can't even be described as knowledge to try and erase other people is only contributing to, the problems that we're dealing with as a whole, right? Is only contributing to the lack of unity that we're all facing and that we're all dealing with. So when we're looking at the way that people are moving across, when we're looking at all of these cousin species, when we're looking at the ghost species, when we're looking at humanity, right? Nobody is the descendant of somebody in another place unless we are talking about you can actually trace that family line. And even then, my bio-father's grandmother got here in 1907. And my bio-father's grandfather got here in 1921. My bio-father's grandfather's last name is Henderson. I can trace his brother and his sister who both stayed in Scotland. I am not the descendant of his brother or his sister. I am not the descendant of the current Hendersons in Scotland. I am a cousin, but I am not a descendant. Even tracing back 3-4 generations. That's literally 3 generations. Even tracing my father's literally tracing back 3 generations. So even then, I am not the descendant of Scottish people who are in Scotland today. I am the descendant of people who left Scotland, right? I am the descendant of people who left Ireland. I am the descendant of people who left England. I am the descendant of people who, even in Turtle Island today, even having ancestors in Turtle Island, I am not the descendant of anybody who is in a specific nation today. Even if it is the same nation that my ancestors belong to, even if I can trace cousins in that nation, I am still not a descendant of those who are alive today. The only person that I am descendant of who's alive today is my biological mother and my biological father. Okay. I actually do not have grandparents on either side anymore. So the only people that I am descendant of that are alive today are my biological mother and my biological father. And I am not descendant of anybody in Scotland, right? I'm not descendant of anybody in any of these other regions. This idea that because a group of people walked through an area means that that's where they're from is pretty cognitively disconnecting. Again, like it seems there is this intense level of disconnect from what reality is on such a broad scale anymore. There is no acceptance of evidence, no acceptance of the stone in my hand, right? Like, this is obsidian. Are you going to tell me it's not obsidian? Like, or are you going to tell me it doesn't exist? It's not on my hand. I'm wearing dip nails. Are you going to tell me that they're not dip nails? They're my natural nail, or maybe they're acrylic nails, Like, are you going to tell me what my eyeglass prescription is because you think you can tell? Like, I mean, if you look close enough, you can see I'm old. I have bifocals, but still, there is this cognitive disconnect that discounts evidence anymore, it seems like. And I'm at a point where I'm just like, you're nuts. You're just insane. And some days I'm able to do it with kindness and generosity of spirit. And some days I only want to thump people over the head. Can I reach through and thump you? Because I just need to thump you today. You just lost your damn mind. What the hell are you thinking? So when we're talking about those ghost species and when we're talking about those other species, we can absolutely see migration patterns of how we're getting to places, right? It is important to understand, though, that none of those migration patterns mean that I am a descendant of, a space that I moved through. That's not what that means. That's never been what that means. It has been something that different groups tried to tout at different times during, the colonization of the Western Hemisphere. That is very much something that those different groups only try to tout during the colonization of the Western Hemisphere because of the fact that those different groups were dealing with their institution of racial structure, right? Their need to institutionalize race and their need to institutionalize their own opinion of racial right? Their own opinion of racial superiority. So when we do things that, are out here actually like discounting and erasing different peoples who have lived in different spaces based on, uh, talking points that have been used for generation after generation by uh, for lack of a better word, white tea supremacists, uh, those who want to maintain that racial stereotype because they feel that by maintaining that racial stereotype, they can maintain their power in this world. It's important to realize that all we're doing is giving a lack of accountability to them and taking away any need for, any understanding of self or growth, right? Um, we can track if we're looking at Australia, we can track that Australians have been there for 70,000 years. We can track that there is a ghost species in Indigenous Australians. When we're looking at the ghost species in Indigenous Australians, we can look at the Moy Hill site in Australia and see that it's very likely that Homo erectus making it to Australia speciates into another species in Australia, and that's the ghost species that we are seeing in Indigenous Australians. It is a distinct ghost species from the other ghost species. And this is how we know that we have 7 ghost species. Absolutely. Each of these ghost species is distinct. The 3 ghost species that we see in the Yoruba and the Khoi people within Africa, the ghost species that we see in Turtle Island Indigenous people and Abayalian Indigenous people, the ghost species that we see in Indigenous Australians, and the ghost species that we see in China, and the ghost species, the last ghost species, the 7th that we see, is only within Neanderthal and Denisovan so far. So each of these ghost species is genetically distinct from each other, which shows that there are 7 other genetically distinct groups of Homo, genus Homo, species out there. These 7 other distinct group of genus Homo species that are out there are all going to be species that, like us, descend from Homo erectus. And with that understanding, we can see within this that as Homo sapien comes to be, we know now the Homo sapien comes to be out of convergence. Looking at bands of Homo species living across Africa, these bands genetically converge, meaning that you have an ergaster and an ancestor and a heidelbergensis, and they're all like getting it on, and ancestor and heidelbergensis have a kid, and maybe ergaster and another ancestor have a kid, and then the kid of both of those gets with the kid of both of those and makes a kid. And this is how we get to Homo sapien. It's having a great grandparent from every other species, right? It's having a parent from several different species. It's having parents and grandparents who are very species mixed. is how we get to Homo sapien. And since we get to Homo sapien like that, as Homo sapien is moving across the world, Homo sapien isn't seeing these different groups of humans as having distinct differences in a way of like what's wrong with you. Like it's not this thought process of you're different, that's bad. It's this thought process of you're different, that's typical. You're different, that's how I grew up, was with difference. You're a new difference, always cool, right? And so, as we're seeing Homo sapiens moving out, we see that Indigenous Australians arrived there 70,000 years ago. They meet up with a group that is already there. When they meet up with that group that's already there, like we do every other species we meet up with, we envelop them within us. It is not a murder, it is not an eradicate. Most of these other species of homogeneous species all speciate from singular groups of Homo erectus descendants. So, like Neanderthal is thought to have come from antecessor or Heidelbergensis. I think it probably is Anne Heidelbergensis. It's still a very genetically narrow human. And the same thing with this Denisovan. It's a genetically narrow human. There's actually so much similarity between Denisovan and Neanderthal, probably because they both come from Heidelbergensis, right? So with this distinct, told you my brain is up today. I dropped. Give me just a second and I'll get back to where I was at. I'm sorry, it's the PTSD, the just mental issues and all of that sort of stuff. And my brain has just dropped today. When we're looking at meeting up with Neanderthal, by the time we meet up with Neanderthal, by the time we meet up with Denisovan, these species have shrunk. There's not a whole lot of them left because they didn't come from lots of genetics. They came from not so many genetics, and so they start dying out. We know for a fact that Neanderthal went to just offline. That's a good way to put it. It's just offline. Neanderthal went through two almost extinction level events in their time as a species, and they were actually very small as a species by the time we meet up with them. And because they're very small as a species by the time we meet up with them, that very smallness of their species by the time we meet up with them means that they need outside genetics. And we can see that within the last of the Neanderthals as well. You can see that they're extremely interbred or inbred. And because they're extremely inbred, getting outside genetics from sapiens, and they are already getting outside genetics, they don't have a Y DNA. We have yet to find a Y DNA for Neanderthal. The 4 Neanderthals that we have that are male, that we have found a Y DNA in, are not Neanderthal Y DNA. It's Denisovan Y DNA or sapien Y DNA. There's not a Y DNA for Neanderthal so far. So we see a group that's so genetically narrow by the time they meet us and by the time they meet up with Denisovan, that getting that outside genes means that they're able to continue as a species. And that's why there's more Neanderthal DNA on the planet today than there was during their time as a species whole. We see the same thing with Denisovan. They're very small by the time they meet up with us, so we envelop them within us. Our looking at Florensis and Luzonzensis shows that these are both very small genetic species as well. Not only that, they're both small species. You know, one's the hobbit, one's the dwarf. It is possible they never had a Y, actually. I don't know if their Y died out. So the Y chromosome does not serve a whole lot of functions. The functions that it serves, it only imparts a couple of genetics, but the genetics it imparts can also be carried on an X chromosome. The only function currently that it serves is the function of switching sex. And that can actually also be found on the X chromosome. The X chromosome itself can also serve as a function of switching sex from male to female. And the Y chromosome in and of itself is a degraded X chromosome. Like it was once an X chromosome and it lost one of its tails, and now it looks like a Y chromosome. And it is actually dying out in our species. Like we are losing our Y chromosome in our species. That doesn't mean that we're losing our males. It just means that we are losing those who carry that specific type of a chromosome. It is the only chromosome like it, right? And the X and the Y are both the if my memory visually serves correct, the chromosomes themselves, the sex chromosomes actually look different. Like it's an X and a Y in the way that they look, and all other chromosomes are a singular. Like it's all others are just a little like line. Um, so uh, the X and the Y are both unique chromosomes because it's like 23 pairs, and that's the 23rd pair. I might have my numbers wrong. If, as I frequently state, I'm shit with numbers. It might be 24 pairs, and that's I don't remember, but there's no, it's 23 because there's 46. So um the other pairs, they match up. The X and the Y are the only pairs that don't match up. So initially they probably did match up, and then one degrades, right? And so it is possible that there was never an X or a Y chromosome within them, and that there is a Y chromosome within Denisovan and Homo sapien. That their actual sex change chromosome or their mass males actually have an X chromosome. And so, what the gender design are having an X chromosome doesn't mean that you're not male with the Neanderthals, but when they're interbreeding with Denisovan and with Homo sapien, of course, it is the Y chromosome within within Denisovan and Homo sapien that indicates being male, and so they're males that are mixed are males that have the the Denisovan or Homo sapien Y chromosome. And then those that we see that look like they have two X chromosomes, maybe one of those X chromosomes for Neanderthals is actually a masculine X chromosome, right? Maybe it's MMT DNA, right? It's a masculine mitochondrial DNA, right? Um, and so uh, those are all things that I know that like they're looking at. There's a lot of studies right now going on about gender in Neanderthals, and gender in other species, not just gender but sex as well. Like what? So looking at gender roles within them as something that's really being studied, but also looking at what sex is, what the biological sex within those groups is also being looked at really intensively right now. There's some studies going on in that. Um, when we're looking at some of the other stuff on this list, I want to go over a couple of these things before I go, and then I'm probably going to go because it is late for me and it makes me feel a little bit, especially if my brain disconnect today, it makes me feel a little bit more anxious. Um, I really want to touch though on the fact that when we look at the Western Hemisphere, we look at a space that has been peopled for at least 50,000 years ago by Homo sapiens. That we look at a space where the peopling before that was enveloped into the Homo sapiens when they came. So those ghost species are all going to be other species of humans that get enveloped into Homo sapiens when those Homo sapiens arrive. So if Homo sapiens arrive in Australia at 70,000 years ago, they envelop the species that's there within them. Homo sapiens arrive in Asia, they envelop the species that's there within them. Homo sapiens arrive in several different regions where it appears that Denisovans where they developed Denisovans within enveloped Denisovans within them. So at 50,000 years ago, when we're seeing the separation, so 50,000 years ago is the genetic separation for Homo sapien that is in Turtle Island in Abiyala. The evidence of people physically being here only goes back 33,000 years ago to a cave in southern Mexico. That separation of genetics means that at 54,000 years ago, the DNA lines, the genetic lines of people in Turtle Island and Abiyala separated from the genetic lines of people everywhere else. The physical evidence of seeing tools here is 34,000, 33,000 years ago. When we look at things like this Rudy Mastodon site, it's not the only site here that predates that. The Sruti Macedon site at 130,000 years ago predates that. Heot Local site predates it at like 250,000 years ago. And Cactus Creek predates it as well. So there are sites that predate this already. We've had sites that have predated this for God since the 60s. Leakey worked on the Cactus Hill site. Like we have sites here. Leakey actually worked on the Cactus Hill site, and it's one of the sites that like people didn't listen to him on. Like people decided that Leakey wasn't a great archaeologist anymore. After Leakey was considered the foremost paleoanthropologists for decades, the fact that Leakey went to Cactus Hill and said, yeah, that's what this is. Really like they put Leakey down for many years for that, right? So we have known for a long time that there is stuff here that predates Homo sapiens arrival. We just haven't had that being published because so many people are against the understanding that the Western Hemisphere was settled long before. Again, that goes to that colonialist mindset that if I can convince you that people were only here 10,000 years, somehow that makes my genocide of them easier for you to swallow. That's really what that is. If I can tell you that people were only here for 10,000 years ago, then for some reason I've equated it in my mind that genocide is therefore okay. You were only here 10,000 years ago anyways, right? It's okay, I killed you. You were only here this long. So we have so many people who are so adamant that that is the reality because they don't want to deal with the fact that, I mean, not that it was ever a fucking good excuse in the first place, but they don't want to deal with the fact that then what excuse that they were using doesn't even work anymore, right? Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm finding people even today, like I found Bomberry today. Like I'm just still finding people. And I sat in this live for 10 minutes before anybody, even a single person got in here. So like I'm low on the FYP totem pole today. Like I'm low down here on the FYP today. So I just I can't with the misunderstanding on that. Thank you. I got it cut. I saw you come in. Well, it says that there's only 5 people in here, but I really think I actually have more than 5 people in here because I know I've seen quite a few people in here that I know have stayed. I saw you come in. I know Kylie's in here. I saw Mia in here. And there's a couple other people. And I saw the anarchist gnome come in. What is the other, like this name comes, it's got to be printed out like completely for me to actually say the name. But I think that they're still in here as well. And Nikki is in here, I think. Where is it? Oh, maybe they left because it was a while ago. Anyways, I've seen a couple people come in and stay, and I so appreciate everybody coming in. I thought you were still, I figured half of it is just not showing it up. It's just not showing it up at the top. Yeah, because that's like 6 people who stated it, and it's only like 5 people up at the top. That makes me feel better actually, because I'm like, what the fuck? So when we look at that rethinking of that rewriting, right? Thank you. That rethinking of that rewriting, I think that we need to, or that rethinking that leads to the rewriting. I think that we need to take that and apply it on a broader scale. Like it's not just when we're looking at the peopling. I try and point out frequently that every scientific thing that you have in your hands today, from playing Fortnite to using TikTok and videotaping it to having it over on the YouTube on my computer to every single thing sitting in my home starts with Homo erectus and fire. All of this stuff starts with Homo erectus and fire, right? So fire being the initial scientific, like there were prior scientific breakthroughs. The changing of tools from the Oldowan tool complex to the Schulian hand axe complex is absolutely a scientific breakthrough. Yet, at 1.5 million years ago, developing the ability to husband fire leads to everything else that we have. It leads to every other capability that we have. And it is a scientific ability. It is a scientific discovery. It is a scientific method that creates our ability to control fire, right? So science goes back to predate us. And yet we can see that in every culture that was able to maintain their connection to the land and their animistic sense for longer periods of time, that indigenous medicine, indigenous science exists within those cultures. Um, it is only when we get the advent of the, idea that really, honestly, I take it to God. I take it to the 400 Council of Nicaea, when we see that Christianity takes over as the, state religion for Rome. We see that this state religion actually has a problem with science and it has a problem with medicine. And medicine is playing God and science is questioning God, and neither of those things are acceptable. And so science and medicine get stomped out of each region as this thought process sweeps across the land, right? So all spaces have science and medicine before that. And it is science and medicine that Homo erectus carries here with him. It is science and medicine that Sapien carries here with him. And I think that those are some really important understandings in the understanding of how it repeoples, how it becomes a part of who we are, and how we move across. I think that we just need to start listening more, right? I think we've entered into a time and a space where everybody is really just reaching a point of disconnect. I was talking to my friend the other day, and my friend has lost a lot of people in their life in the last year. Many of them have you know um, chosen to be lost, right? Um, and I was saying, and I know that they think the same way I do on a lot of things. And I was saying, sometimes I wonder if um, it's checking out. Like the Matrix is kind of glitching and people are starting to check out. Now, I don't believe in the Matrix. Like the movie The Matrix, I do believe that we're all energy. And so I believe that this is like kind of think of it like a holodeck, I guess. I think it's, like all the energy manifests. And I don't really like the way we use the word manifest anymore. So I don't like using it as much. But like this is all a manifestation of our minds. Like our minds and our energy manifests. This is a global manifestation. And I told them, I said, I kind of think people are starting, everybody's angry anymore. Everybody's, like you can't drive down the road without almost getting hit. And everybody's screaming at each other in the supermarket. And, eh, the amount of people who are choosing to check out is extremely high. And I told my friend, I said, I think that it's just that, people are just done. Like it's just reaching a point that they can't anymore. And my friend, she's like, well, why? And I said, well, I think that some people are waking up and they can't handle the waking up. And yeah, well, and I don't look at it like that. I don't look at it like we're all like plugged in. I look at it like we're all energy, and energy is a constant interaction. And I believe like our consciousnesses formed the world itself. Like this is all a energy that is all interactive, and it is, the manifestation of the dog that manifests the dog, basically. I explain it in my brain sometimes as the matrix, just because of the fact that it is so interconnected, and it's one of those ways that people can easily kind of understand it, but it has none of that alien level to it. Like I don't believe in an alien. I don't believe that there's an outside of it either. Like I believe it is it, right? um Yeah, I can see that one. I like the holodeck theory and thought process because it still has an outside, which I don't think that there's an outside. Like I just don't think that there's an outside. I think it's just is. Like this just is the is, right? It's just is the is because we thought of it. All of that aside though, I was telling them I think that people are just kind of checking out because they're just realizing, because we're reaching a point where everybody is so done with the world around us, right? So just done. And I can understand that. We live in a world that is teaching us to disconnect on a regular basis. It's teaching us that reality is not reality, right? There's this constant gaslighting of what reality is. Um, we have in the last few years gone through so much trauma, and we're entering into so much more trauma. I don't know. I mean, we are literally currently factually within, the third iteration of world violence that we didn't want to talk about. I mean, like, uh, 1 and 2 was literally claimed 1 and 2 when you had the superpowers fighting against others. And we're currently there, right? Like, we're currently where the whatchamacallums, the people that are in control, not the people, the nations that are the superpowers within the globe have bound together to ally to go against other nations, right? This is, and then, well, we have that going on. We have a couple of other zones of that going on, right? So, because of that, it's technically we've reached a point of World War III. We've technically reached that point. And after, I mean, nobody's calling it that yet, but that is the technicality of it. And after several, years of just trauma after trauma, pandemic, all of these other things going on, I think it makes sense that people are just checking out. Like, people are just done. Like, okay, well, and if it's, I believe in God, well, maybe it's at the point where, okay, it's here, I'm done. I'm just going to check out. We'll see if it comes later, right? But I don't think it's just completely the physical checkout. I think that a lot of it's a mental checkout that we see a lot of as well. And there just seems to be this mental disconnect. It's hardest, I think, for those of us who understand that need for community and nurturing that's biologically a part of us, that understand that need for community to be healthy and to be safe, right? I mean, I hope it is, yet. So, like, technically, if you think about it, and I don't want to get too, like, in depth here because of the fact that how this whole thing will react. 1 and 2 were called 1 and 2 when 3 nations united to fight against other nations who were trying to overtake, right? So, when we're looking at what we're dealing with right now, we have, and those, it's important to look at what nations, right? Because we have this thought process of the allies, and the thought process that the allies are the superpower, like, the global elites, right? And then we have the thought process of, it's been called many other things, but those that we're against, right? And what we're dealing with right now is states that we have seen prior, that were on the opposite side, right? Facing, are unifying to face, right? Like, currently we have 4 nations actively protecting those who are trying to not be eliminated, right? And we have 2 outside nations and 1 nation uniting to eliminate a specific group of people, right? And then, so this in itself, like, this is literally at this point 7 to 8 different countries that are actively fighting each other. I'm going to say 7 because 1 is fighting in the courts, right? But 7 different countries that are actively shooting at each other, right? At each other, like 4 and 3 shooting at each other. And then we have 2 other places where there's active war going on of one group trying. So, like, 2 was not just, this group fighting this group. There was also this group down here and this group over here that were fighting, right? And so we're dealing with that same thing. There is this group fighting this group, these large groups, 2 fighting, and then we have this other country over here where one country is trying to invade another, and we have another country over here where one country is trying to invade another. So this is by the same standard that that was 2, this is absolutely already entered into for 3 on a technical level, right? So I can completely understand where everybody's checking out is the basis of all of that. I can completely understand that. Which leads into, and why we're talking about it, the fact that we are all nurturing and communal as a species biologically. The fact that biologically it is important to our species that we take care of each other. Things that are toxic to a species kills off a species. Things that are healthy to a species allow that species to grow. We are currently in the midst of doing our best to kill off our species because we are dealing with some toxic things that are toxic to us. They're not innate to us. They're against who we are. Biologically, we are nurturing and communal, and biologically, we should be taking care of each other. And so when we biologically need this and we're not getting these needs met, it turns into... So I think the level of cognitive disconnect that we see and the level of numbness is a huge part of this as well. I think it's kind of an unhealthy reaction to an unhealthy society. Depression and anxiety, worried that there's a problem, these are healthy reactions to an unhealthy society. So dealing with depression and anxiety, as opposed to the cognitive disconnect, is really a healthy process, right? Healthy way to process through this. My friend who's lost so many people in this last year, like they're depressed constantly, not like they're going to harm themselves, but like they just don't want to leave their room. They're just sad. It's like I told them, you're doing the right thing. You're grieving. You need to grieve. It's just hit after hit after hit. You need to sit and grieve it, right? You need to sit in your grief. You need to allow yourself your grief. If you were to shove it down, to disconnect from it, this is where we get these unhealthy levels like cognitive disconnect, right? Where we get this numbness, where we get this lack of give a flying fuck that children is going, like, and so there is a healthy way to deal with the societal issue that we're dealing with, and there's an unhealthy way. If you are dealing with depression and anxiety, if you're dealing with the awareness that there's a problem and the wish that you could fix it, worried that you're the problem, if that's what you're dealing with, then what you're doing is having a healthy reaction to an unhealthy situation. And I think that that's important for people to understand, right? This is very much a healthy reaction to an unhealthy society, right? I do believe that there are enough people that are awake these days that we're making change. I do believe that there is enough people aware today that we are making change. I do believe that's the only way we can make change. I want to ask people to take care of themselves. Every human being has the right to love and compassion and grace just by being alive. These are things that are necessities for our survival as a human being. And since we have the right to life, we have the right to the things that it takes to be alive, which means we have the right to love and compassion and grace. So you are worthy of those things just by breathing. You don't have to be doing other things to earn them. They're not things that you have to earn. They're given. They're things that you have an innate need for, so they have an innate right for, right? So it's important that you give yourself grace and love and compassion in a time where it's unlikely that you're getting grace and love and compassion from outside sources. It's important that we have this understanding of love and self and give that to ourselves. I am going to go ahead and take off. I am like, my body is starting to freak out sitting here. And so I'm sorry. I know it's hard. I want to be here longer, but my body is giving me that you need to move. So I am going to take off. I will be back tomorrow morning. And then I will, because it's a weekend, I won't be off or on as much, but it will be in tomorrow morning and then probably back in on Sunday. this week turned out to be a lot busier than I thought. I spent all day yesterday gone and spent most of the day before doing like here and there kind of stuff. So it's been a little bit disconnected or discombobulated, and that's why I haven't been in as much as I'd hoped to be. But I will be here tomorrow, and I will go ahead and be back in on Sunday if I don't make it in over the weekend. Well, there's only one in day. Tomorrow's Friday. I might make it in on Saturday. I'll definitely be here Friday, and I'll definitely be here Sunday. I might make it in on Saturday, I guess is a better way to put that. Take care. Love yourself. You deserve it. You are absolutely worthy just by breathing. You and I know every single person in here I've had a conversation with, right? And every single person in here I know is working to ensure community safety and community health, right? And so we're worthy just by being alive. We're doubly worthy when we're contributing to try and make sure that there's that communal reciprocity, because then we're working for communal too, right? So I know for a fact that every person in here not only is worthy of it, but really probably needs and deserves it. So please give yourselves love. And I love each and every single human being I see in this live right now, because I've had conversations with all of you and adore all of you, and see you for the communal, loving individuals that you are. And I want to thank you for you in my world. Take care, everybody, and I will be back tomorrow. Much love. Take care. You too. I appreciate you.